This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, July 11th, 2019, and my guest is no other than Christian DeLooper. Hi, Christian, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. You write for Digital Trends and also another publication, right?
Yeah, actually, I write for a bunch of publications. I freelance, actually. So my main gig is Digital Trends. I do a lot of mobile stuff for them, a lot of news stuff for them. But I also write a bit for Tech Radar. I do some e-commerce stuff for Business Insider and Forbes.
That's who I was thinking of.
A couple
BI.
other outlets as well.
Yeah. Well, I always somehow end up reading you on Digital Trends more than anywhere else. I have no idea why that is.
Most of what I write is on Digital Trends.
Okay, well, that explains it then.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so you saw the topics. There's a bunch of interesting news this week.
It's been a busy week.
Yeah, right. So I am going to transition right into that right now. The big thing I want to start with, it's not that big, but it's kind of interesting. And, because we always talk about the flagship and the high-end phones, but Qualcomm launched a new Snapdragon chip, which is not a high-end Snapdragon chip, and it's the 215.
Yeah, it's kind of like the successor to the 212, I guess. Interesting chip. It's probably going to be in a bunch of low-end handsets over the next year or so, but it seems like it's got some pretty sweet features given, the price that you'd expect it for the phones that it's going to be in,
So, you were there for the briefing, right? I was on that call. I think you were too.
Yep.
What did you think stood out from you, like, in what do you think it's going to enable on future, like, $100-ish phones?
I guess the biggest thing is like pretty modest changes, but changes that will be helpful given the price that of the phones that it will be in. You know what I mean? So it's the first chip in the 200 series to allow for 1080p video recording, which is cool.
Yeah.
It's the first to allow for NFC payments, so you'll get Google Pay or whatever your preferred payment system is on Android in the lower end handsets. It's 64-bit as well, which means that
that was a big deal,
it's a lot
right?
faster.
Yeah,
it is a big deal. According to Qualcomm, this chip will be 50% faster compared to the previous gen Snapdragon 212, and a lot of that is thanks to the fact that it's 64-bit compared to 32-bit, which is what the 212 was.
Yeah, totally. I was excited with some of the imaging improvements I saw as well there. Obviously, we've seen a very clear migration of the imaging performance from flagship downward slowly, but it hasn't really reached quite as low as that yet. And we're starting to see some features there with MediaTek as well, I would like to add.
Totally.
That are really kind of like, wow, okay, at that price point for those kind of phones, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's, I believe it's the first in the 200 series to offer dual camera support as well, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, dual rear camera, just to be clear, because obviously you want to be able to run them at the same time to do like that depth stuff. So that's what they're talking about when they say dual camera support. Yeah, no, I was excited. I think it's cool. I think Qualcomm's always doing some interesting thing. The 64-bit really got me interested. The the imaging stuff and AI features and the price point. And we don't know what the first phone is going to be with this device, but we're gonna. They were, what was the pricing? They were targeting $80 to $150 roughly.
Yeah, it was somewhere in that range. It was kind of, they were a bit hazy on it, but up to 150, I think, is what we'd probably expect for that kind of chipset.
And then for me, the only disappointment, it's a minor thing, but it maxes out at 720 displays, not full HD. So it doesn't do 1080p displays, and I thought that was a bit odd because even though at that price point, I guess 720 is good enough, and if you have a small enough screen, you still have pretty great resolution, like dot per inch, density at 720p. But I was like, I would have liked to see a 1080p display on support on that, just in case you want to do something,
Yeah, you and I both spend so much time talking about flagships that it's a bit shocking every time we see a phone with a 720p display. But yeah, it would have been nice, but maybe next gen. Snapdragon 217 or whatever.
I guess I kind of had assumed that we were there already, like that we were able to drive 1080p displays from anything.
Yeah.
But I guess we're not quite there yet, and that's okay. Like the reality is this: I recently reviewed Moto's G7. power, the 5,000 milliamp hour monster beast that lasted me an entire 3 days of normal use. It was insane. But it had a Snapdragon 600 series, which is a whole different ballgame. Right. But it had a 720p display, and frankly, it wasn't horrible. Like it was fine. Like I had it with the G7 non-power, which is a 1080p display side by side, and yes, you could tell. I mean, I'm not a pixel peeper. My eyesight isn't that great, but I just didn't feel like, even though these are pretty big phones with pretty big screens, they're 6-inch plus. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. So I think that, if you're buying at that price point, why not just stick with 720p, right?
Well, and I don't think most people will care. I think that most people buying a handset in this price range just want a reliable phone that's going to last a couple years. And, if you want a fancy display, you're going to save up more money and get it. And, I think it's fine. I would like to see 1080p on those lower end handsets soon, but for now, it's not too bad.
It's gonna happen. We're gonna get to the 1080p at the $100 price point. I think it's coming.
Yep.
And I think it might be MediaTek driving that first. So that's and that's gonna matter for the future as Android evolves. It's gonna go more and more 64-bit, and we saw that with iOS, right? Remember when was it the iPhone 5?
I think 5S? It was in that range.
It was one of the early ones that had like that new A series chip at the time supported 64-bit was a big feature. And we were all looking at each other going, 64-bit on a phone, why would you need that? Remember that? Yeah. And now we're like, of course, right? Like, but I think Apple was very early in that assessment of going to 64-bit on mobile. Yeah. And, at the time we were like, well, do you really need to address this much memory? Does that? But It's not about that. It's just about general performance.
And I think it's about future proofing as well. I mean, it's nice to see that they're kind of moving towards that, even in their lower end chipsets. And it's the right move. And another big thing is that it supports Android Go, which I think a lot of these lower end handsets will ship with.
Yeah, but will they? So this is my big gripe with Android Go is that Android Go, when it was announced, a big fanfare, and we had. It sounded good on paper, but every Android Go phone I've used has been a terribly ugly, horrible experience. In fact, I would argue that Alcatel launched the Alcatel One, whatever it was, the really cheap one a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it was a Go phone, and it was crap. And then this past year, they launched the one, whatever it was, the replacement. And the price is pretty much the same. The specs are way better. And all of a sudden, this thing runs regular Android. And it only has like 2 gigs of RAM or something, but it still works. And honestly, it works better than an Android Go phone in my experience. I don't know why we even need Android Go at this point.
Fair enough. I mean, I haven't played around a lot with the Android Go phones, but I'd be interested to see how well it works over time, considering how much more lightweight Android Go is supposed to be compared to standard Android. I'd be interested to see performance at the 1.5 year mark. You know what I mean?
Right. The bottom line is that it's not very usable.
Sure.
You can't run all the apps very well, right?
Right.
And so they've created some optimized apps, especially Google has for their ecosystem, which are definitely way faster and more streamlined on Android Go.
Sure.
But then, your Instagrams and Facebooks and things you really need are not up. Well, Facebook has an Android Go version, but the things you really want and need that people are going to not want to sacrifice on just don't run well on Android Go because there's not enough RAM. In fact, they don't even install sometimes.
Yeah.
You're still going to get a kind of slow and crappier experience than, even a mid-range phone with 3 to 4 gigs of RAM. But at least you can run the apps, even if you have to maybe close all the other ones to run them. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
So that's kind of been my experience. And then again, sample size of 1. It was only the Alcatel. Nokia made some Android Go phones as well. And I don't know if they're any good because I've never tested them.
I think the Nokia 2, which actually had the previous gen Snapdragon 212, it was an Android Go phone, if I recall correctly.
Speaking of, by the way, as an aside for the audience who's listening, I'm finally getting a Nokia 9. It's shipped.
Oh, there you go.
And I'm just want to say, people are going to say, what, Miriam, what are you talking about? You could have bought one like 3 months ago. Yeah, no, I don't buy phones, okay? So I was waiting for a review unit, and Nokia finally is indulging me with a device after months.
About time.
Well, look, it's interesting because, a lot of the reviewers, it turns out, that I thought got a review unit just went on and bought one when it became available at Best Buy. And I just didn't want to play that game. So the drawback is I'm not getting a new one, so I won't be able to do an unboxing video for folks that is like, a clean new phone from scratch. I mean, it's a perfectly good condition phone from what I gather. I haven't seen it yet. But the reality is I'll be able to give you some thoughts and feedback on the experience of this camera system. And that's what I'm way overdue about, because this has been a major imaging milestone this year. For better or for worse, there's been a lot of criticism, a lot of, concerns around the imaging performance. But at least now I'll be able to speak with authority about it. And I just want to let you know that that's coming. I'm going to have Steve Litchfield on the show in the next few weeks. He is, I don't know if you know him, Christian. He's a UK-based tech reviewer, journalist who has a long time experience with imaging, and we've known each other for a really long time. So we're going to be discussing that together. And so I just want to let you know it's coming. Just don't expect to be a new device. And it took a long time. I think for a little while there, I think they were ready to send me one about a month and a half ago. And then there was some snafus. They had a unit for me, but then they sent it to someone else by accident.
Then they didn't. Oh, man.
And then they didn't have any anymore. And then, finally it came down to, look, Miriam, we've been trying to send you a new one because we know you like to do unboxings and your YouTube audience really likes the unboxings, but we're just not going to be able to. And if we can make you wait further and not promise you a delivery date on a new one,
right?
Or we can bite the bullet and finally send you one that's been used before. And I was like, just send me one that's been used before. It's been too long,
Yeah. At least you'll be able to play around with it a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So hey, I'm not usually a person to kind of give people Prime deals or like sales deals on the show, but I did find that you wrote a story on Digital Trends about Prime Day phone deals, and that's coming up. And I think that the podcast will be published in a day or two after this Thursday, the 11th that we are today. So it might coincide actually. And I'm thinking, can you give us like the super short version? I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but the super quick version of that here on the show.
So the super quick version is that we have no idea what the Prime Day smartphone deals will be yet because they have not announced them. The slightly drawn out version is that probably there will be some Android Prime exclusive phones, those Android phones that ship with Alexa and Amazon apps built in, that kind of thing. Samsung phones have been getting pretty heavy discounts on Amazon over the past few months, so maybe they'll announce something there. But right now you can get a Note 8 for like $400 off or something, which is pretty good. We expect kind of deals on those phones, the Moto G7 and G6, and they got a couple Moto phones and LG phones that are Amazon Prime phones or whatever they're called. So that's kind of what we expect, but no official word on that just yet.
Well, I mean, at least you're giving us the lowdown. That's all we really needed. So that's good news. I want to tell, related to this, I want to give the audience a kind of an exciting bit of news, is that I now have a partnership with GearBest, and I have some deals for you folks on some devices that I think you're going to really, really enjoy. There's a deal on the OnePlus 7, the regular 7, not the Pro, for $455.99. And a deal on the P30 Lite, so this is not the Pro or the P30 regular, for $299.99. If you're looking for these links, I don't want to spell them out here. I will put them on my YouTube channel. So basically all my GearBest stuff is going to YouTube. So look for the OnePlus 7 video, the last one, and you'll see in the description there'll be a deal for OnePlus 7 for $455.99. And then look for the last video I did on the P30 and P30 Pro, and you'll see a link in there for $299.99 for P30 Lite. So if you're shopping for a deal this Prime Day and you want to support the podcast and support the YouTube channel, I know it's a little bit of hunting because you got to find the last OnePlus 7 Pro video and the last Huawei P30 Pro video on my channel, but that maybe encourages you to go to the channel and get a really good deal. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm giving everybody a bit of love for Prime Day.
Sounds worth it to me.
Right on. So moving on, there is some other stuff we've kind of like discussed and put in the notes. Let's pick something.
You played around with the Xiaomi Mi 9T, right?
Yeah,
how's
that's
that?
the one I was wondering if we should jump in there. I just want to quickly say that I have one, and there'll be a link to my unboxing video. And honestly, I'm blown away by this thing.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of the software. I've already made this very clear on my Mi Mix 3 review, and prior to that on various other Xiaomi phones like the Poco phone. that I'm not a huge fan of their skinning. It's a little too heavy-handed for me, but man, the bang for your buck in terms of hardware that you get with this is like kind of unmatched, honestly.
Is this the first phone with the Snapdragon 730?
That is, as far as I know, the first
one of
phone.
them, at least.
Yeah, it's definitely one of them, but it's possibly the first one. And and so it's exciting because honestly, it's basically in terms of performance slots right around the Snapdragon 845, last year's flagship. So as you know, the 710 last year was an 845 detuned. Right. And the 855 got detuned to the 730. So the 730 is kind of like basically running an 845 with, some stuff is worse, some stuff is better. Yeah. And for $350, this phone
that's a pretty solid deal.
A 4,000 milliamp hour battery, a Snapdragon 730 with 6 gigs of RAM. It has 3 cameras in the back, one of it which is the Sony IMX 582, which is, I'm going to say, what's that? How is that different from the legendary IMX 586? Well, let me tell you, it doesn't support 4K video at 60 frames per second. That's it.
Okay.
It's the same sensor. It's kind of a slightly cheaper version of that sensor that apparently Sony, it's not even listed on like Wikipedia in the IMX article. There's an entire, like, if you guys haven't seen this yet, listeners, you really should do yourselves a favor and go to Wikipedia and type like Sony IMX, and there's an entire page that lists every IMX sensor ever made, what devices it's in, and the specs. And if you're a nerd like me, you'll really dig it. It's kind of cool, including like, Nikon cameras and stuff. And same with Snapdragon, like, and MediaTek. Like, if you want to know, what Snapdragon went in which phone, there is a list of all the Qualcomm chipsets and what phones they went into on Wikipedia. It's really cool. I use it a lot for reference. Along the same lines, there's also a list of all the bands used by all the different carriers for LTE and 3G and all 5G and all that. So you can kind of like go in there. Some little Oompa Loompas are constantly updating this stuff behind the scenes. It's like magic.
It seems like a great deal. I mean, I haven't been able to play around with it, but I was wondering, like, have you been able to take any photos with it yet?
No, I've used it. Yeah, I haven't posted anything yet. I'm kind of like accumulating a few photos before I can like start putting stuff on Instagram and comment on it. Sure. So 3 cameras in the back, ultra wide angle, f/2.4. I think it's a 13 or 12 megapixel. Then there's a tele 2x optical 8 megapixel f/2.4. And then there is the main camera, which is 48 megapixel IMX 582. And that one's f/1.7. And it is not OIS. So that's another thing you have to understand. None of these 3 lenses have OIS. Now, of course, it doesn't matter for the ultra wide, but for the main and especially the tele, it would have been nice, but they don't. But I mean, they do software stabilization to some extent because there's the ISP and the 730 Snapdragon supports it. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with the results. It's not like, it feels to me like I'm using a OnePlus 7 Pro.
Cool. Yeah.
Like, there's no stabilization, so in low light, it's a little more rougher, but honestly, and I don't think it has a dedicated night mode either, but it has portrait and has everything else. Honestly, $350, this phone is insane. And you know that they make, at least in Russia, they make Xiaomi Mi 9T Pro, which instead of the 730 has a Snapdragon 855 in it.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
And it's slightly more expensive. But here's the kicker. You can buy these 2 phones from Redmi as well. The Redmi K20 is the Mi 9T. And the K20 Pro is the Mi 9T Pro. They're the same. They're just rebranded. Yeah. They have the same specs and the same everything. I actually should check right now by pulling out of my pocket to see if it has NFC. I think it does, which is kind of amazing. Let me just check. Before I make an ass of myself. I
mean, even without it, for that kind of price, like, there are few phones that match that spec sheet.
It has NFC.
Well, there you go. Even better.
I mean, $350 for a Chinese phone with NFC, triple lens in the back, 4,000 milliamp hours, Snapdragon 730 or 855 if you buy the more expensive Pro version. And here's the kicker. It's got a pop-up camera.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I mean, I don't remember the specs. I think it's 16 megapixel or 20 megapixel. It's nothing to write home about. It takes fine selfies and nothing crazy. Sure. But it's cool because as it slides up and down, like the OnePlus, it has a light in it. Like it's got this blue LED light that kind of like glows around it.
Oh, cool.
As it slides up and slides down. And here's the kicker, Christian, you're going to love this. It's also the notification light.
Oh, cool.
So when you get a notification, the outline around the camera pod when it's retracted shines like flashes blue.
Yeah.
It's very very
and then
cool.
you can see it at the top.
Yeah, exactly. You have to look at it in a bit of an angle, because if you're staring at the phone straight down, you won't be able to necessarily notice. So that's one little thing. But I just like the idea that they did that. They went through that little bit of detail.
The notification light is not dead yet.
Yep. Also, it has a headphone jack.
Solid.
And it has, of course, USB-C. No wireless charging, though.
Yeah.
As I said, for the money, like, I'm willing to live with Xiaomi's very broken skin of Android to have that kind of hardware and performance. And it hasn't skipped a beat. It's been rock solid for me. So the other thing to keep in mind about this phone is, it's not officially available in the US, because Xiaomi is not officially available in the US, but it's relatively easy to find, just like the K20 and K20 Pro.
Cool.
That new Mi 90 Pro, however, is, I think, announced but not out yet. It's only going to be available in Russia, and eventually I'm sure we'll find it gray market. But those are right now, I think, I would say the best bang for the buck of any phone I have ever used in terms of hardware. Like, yes, there's no OIS, and yes, it's not water resistant, there's no wireless charging, but $350, folks.
Yeah, that's a great deal.
And here's the other thing. It's glass. It's not a fake glass back. It's like metal and glass sandwich. They didn't sacrifice on materials like, Vivo did on some of their cheaper, super price sensitive phones. And that was surprising to me. I was like, really, like, at this point, if it was an acrylic back that looked like glass, I wouldn't even care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
At $350. And so when you think about it, I reviewed, the Moto G7. We just talked about the G7 Power. Now the G7 Power is in the $250 range, but the G7, at least when it was announced, was about $300. And yeah, it's dropped in price because that's what Moto always does. They come out and then weeks later it's like, $50, $100 less. So right now it's not a good comparison, but initially at the initial price point, you could have gotten a Moto G7 for $300. And surely with warranty and all that, but you could have then also paid $50 more to get a Xiaomi Mi 9T. Wow.
More powerful, probably better camera, bigger battery. I mean,
it's just better all
there's no
around,
comparison,
like, other than
yeah.
software. And of course, the G7 does work on Verizon and Sprint, which is, and has a warranty, which is nice.
Yeah.
But anyway, very exciting. I don't know if you have a chance to play with it. Have you used one at all?
No, I have not had a chance to play with one yet, but I'm looking forward to getting my hands on one.
You should ping Xiaomi PR. They seemed very eager to give them to everybody. Like,
okay.
I reached out asking for a K20 Pro. The version of that was a Snapdragon 855.
Yeah.
And they said, we don't have those yet, but I can send you a consolation prize, a Mi 9T. And I was like, what is this Mi? I've heard this Mi 9T. What is this? Like, and I didn't realize, I thought it was a completely different phone, but no, it's pretty much the same thing, which is why they offered it.
Yeah.
And I was like, 730, new chip. Yeah, by all means, send it my way. And I was just like, wow, this is freaking great. So I highly recommend this phone after having it in my pocket for about a week. Like, wow, seriously, solid.
Yeah.
Note 10 and Pixel 4 rumors. We got a bunch of the ones here. So is this really a leak, or did Samsung actually purposely post these photos of the Note 10?
Oh, the jury's out on that one. Good question. We don't know. But, I'm in two minds about these leaks. Not their authenticity, but rather how I feel about the Note 10 and the Pixel 4 at this point.
Do tell. I would like to hear.
I think the Note 10 looks like a solid device. I don't love the design. I think it I like the big display. I like the hole punch cutout, that kind of thing. It just feels a lot more rectangular, kind of like those old Sony phones a bit.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of. And I don't love that. But apart from that, it seems like a really solid phone. I mean, obviously it's a Note series phone. And yeah.
I personally will admit that I do like this design.
Yeah.
I do like this squared off design. Not as extreme as like Razer or even Sony.
Yeah.
Although the newer Sonys are a little softer on the edges, like the Xperia 1, which I'm hoping to get a review in it soon. By the way, I've requested it.
Yeah.
is kind of okay, not as offensive as the original slabby,
right?
Sony's.
Yeah, the new ones aren't too bad.
I do feel that the Razer is too slabby. It's funny because I really like the Nextbit Robin, which Razer acquired Nextbit,
right?
And that's why their industrial design is kind of like Nextbit crossed with Razer, like the colors of Razer, like the matte black design of Razer with the boxiness of the Nextbit. I didn't mind the boxiness on the Nextbit, but because I thought the colors were cool. But somehow the Razer doesn't do it for me. But I have to say, so far, again, this is based on renders only.
Yeah.
But I am pretty excited about what I'm seeing about the Note 10. Now, of course, I know it's not going to have a headphone jack and blah, blah, blah. And there's some things that have changed that I wish hadn't changed. But I'm also looking forward to this rumor of a new camera that has 3 apertures.
Yeah.
Like f1.5, 1.8, and 2.4. And that's... overkill and crazy, but wow, like 3 apertures?
I think that'll be like one of the big standout features, the camera. I mean, apart from,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I also love how, I kind of like the hole punch in the middle. It's funny because I've always thought the hole punch on the left or right was good because it kind of gets out of the way.
Yeah.
And maybe it was a novelty at the time, but the hole punch was like, I like it. I think this is the way to go for a phone.
Yeah.
But then...
I definitely prefer it in the middle. Definitely. I mean, compared to the left or right.
But it looks really hot in the middle like that, right?
Yeah. Centered, nice and symmetrical.
Oh, this isn't bad at all.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is there's so little bezel on this phone. It just kind of blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're taking the screen to the next level there with the edge-to-edge display.
And so for me, honestly, I can kind of live with maybe that more kind of squarish design just to get that
right,
almost like real infinity design that they've been kind of talking about but not really achieving for years now.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying it's an ugly phone by any means. I just don't love the super rectangular shape and the lack of, rounded corners. I think, I don't know, it just looks a bit old to me, but I get why people like it.
I think it's going to be different for Samsung, like they've always been a little bit on the rounded side. And I think this kind of like marks a bit of a departure in the design language. And, it was getting a little stale there, I think. So I'm glad.
Yeah.
I think the S10 series felt very transitional. If you look at the designs we've seen of the Note 10 and then you look at the previous Note 9 and even the S9, you can really see a clear evolution towards this boxier, I guess, design language, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
So it's good to see Samsung experiment a little bit because a lot of people are going to have this phone. So
yeah. It'll be out pretty soon, too. It's supposed to be out on August 7th, or announced on August 7th.
Will you be at the event in New York?
I will not. No, I will not be.
Okay, I'm going to be there. So those folks who are in New York City, let's hang out. And then the Pixel 4 rumors. What do you make of those?
Oh man, here we go. The Pixel 4 rumors. Another case of me really not liking the design that much. I think Google is kind of. They're a bit backwards at this point. They're kind of trying to be anti-Apple in some respects by not adopting the full edge-to-edge display. They still got a forehead on there, all that kind of stuff. But they're not being anti-Apple because they got a square camera cutout on the back. They've announced that officially. They put some renders online a couple of weeks ago of the back of the phone. I think it's starting to look a little dated. I mean, the Pixel 3 was really kind of taken down a notch. Literally, because of the huge notch. And I think they kind of saw that and were like, okay, we can't do a huge notch, so let's just go back to a forehead. And I don't love that. That seems like a cop-out to me.
Yeah, I think it's terrible. I would honestly, at this point, why don't you balance it out like to do the Pixel 2 XL and put a bit of a chin at the bottom?
Yeah.
Make it look like, the new Red Magic 3 is like that. It's 19.5 by 9 this aspect ratio, but it still has front-facing speakers and it's very, very balanced looking.
Yeah.
This looks completely out of balance, and I'd rather have a chin than a forehead. And yes, Google, we complained about the notch, not because it was a notch, because it was the biggest notch that's ever notched, okay?
Yeah, it took up half the screen. I mean, I don't know. We'll have to see. Maybe these rumors are false. Maybe we'll just have to wait for the Pixel 5.
I'm telling you, based on last year, this is the real deal, and it's not looking good. And
I'm just holding out
also,
hope.
it sounds like the rear camera is going to be the second one instead of an ultra wide, which is what I think everybody really wants.
Yeah,
it's going to be a tele lens. It looks like.
Yeah.
So that is bad news.
The idea of that is to help out with zoom, but also portrait mode shots, which Google Pixel phones are already pretty good at doing. Like, I don't think anyone cares too much about better portrait mode, but I think they do care about wide angle.
Yeah, I just wish the product managers at Google need to listen. Like, I just don't, I mean, they did listen, they didn't give us a notch, but like, it's kind of almost like they're giving us the finger for like bitching about the notch last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not appropriate behavior. Sorry. And look, I'm I don't know if you know this, Christian, but I'm a big Pixel Nexus fan. I use my daily drive is always one of them.
Yeah.
And it's just because I think a little bit, I keep joking about saying a little bit of it is Stockholm syndrome in a way.
Sure.
But at the same time, getting the updates, getting the best Google experience is really important to me.
Yeah.
But I did not like the hardware this year. I feel like the biggest gripe for me wasn't really, I mean, the notch was aesthetic and I got over it, but the 4 gigs of RAM, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be fair, probably the Pixel 4 will be great to use, and the camera will be incredible, and it'll have tons of really smart features, and Google Assistant will be better than ever. But, that doesn't mean that, the design is great, and, we'll have to see. Well, I guess we can't assume that the performance will be good given last year, but I think they will have learned from that.
I hope so, and I just want more RAM. Like I'm gonna have to probably swallow my pride around the chin. Sorry, the forehead.
Yeah.
Like I did around the notch. But give me hardware that will age well. That's all I want, Google.
Yeah.
You're already launching this thing at the end of the year with the Snapdragon 855,
right?
And so it's gonna have to last an entire year. That's always the problem with the Pixels, right?
Well, it's going to have to last an entire year for us reviewers, but it's going to have to last at least 2 or 3 years for everyone else. And I don't know if it can do that.
That is true. Yeah, and that's the challenge. I mean, the Pixel 2 is still holding its own. I have to say, I don't have one, but a lot of my friends do. They never upgrade to the 3.
Yeah.
They seem to be pretty happy still, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, the listeners here are pretty tech savvy. I would say most of them update their phone every year. Okay. So I think we're safe by saying that it'll last. It'll be okay for a year. Another, not a rumor, but kind of something that came out of China. Honor, the Huawei subsidiary, has been making a series of phones for a number of years now.
Yeah.
That have a number with X next to it. Yeah. And they sold in Europe, in the US for a while. Like I think the 5X, 6X, and 7X was sold in.
Yeah, there was a bit there.
In the US. The 8X last year didn't come to the US officially. It almost did. And then of course now there's a 9X, and it's going to launch apparently soon at the end of July.
Yep.
On the 23rd.
Yep.
Somewhere in China. So this is China only for now. But it's interesting because that phone used to launch in like November, and now last year it launched a little earlier, like September, and this year it's launching in July. So it's like they're pushing it forward.
Right.
And I honestly, I've always loved the numbered X Honor phones. They're like more affordable.
Yeah.
The only gripe I've always had with them, especially in the last couple of years, was lack of NFC and micro USB for charging.
Right.
And I had an 8X. Unfortunately, I only used it briefly because the 8X they sent me in October was not compatible with any LTE or 3G bands in the US.
No.
So I had to basically use it on T-Mode 2G, which was bad.
Yeah, that's no fun.
So thankfully, I was going to Taiwan for a work trip, and I took it with me and put a Taiwanese SIM in there. And I was able to use it on 4G LTE for a few days and experience it as a really great little phone.
Yeah.
And I didn't give it much love on the podcast because it's hard to recommend a phone that doesn't support bands for half of my audience.
Right.
But hopefully this 9X is eventually available because it's supposedly coming with a new Kirin chip, the 800 series.
Yeah, Kirin 810, I think, is what it's
supposed to feature. Yeah, and it might
feature.
support more bands. The problem with the 700 series Kirin that the 8X had was that, you pretty much have to make multiple SKUs with multiple bands, unlike the Kirin 900 series phones that support all the bands out of the box. So, because these are chipsets with built-in LTE modems, just like Qualcomm does.
Right.
So this will be interesting to see because if it does, then we can even buy gray market. And it seems that with the relaxing of the Huawei rule recently, although that's not been made official yet,
no,
I think we might see we might be able to at least import Huawei and Honor phones via gray market without, them getting stuck in FedEx limbo.
Yeah.
Like what happened to Sasha at PC Mag, who was on my show last week. If you haven't listened to last week's show, you should. There's a whole discussion about that.
Yeah, it seems like it'll be a solid phone. I mean, the Kirin 810 will probably be comparable to the Snapdragon 730, which, as we've mentioned, is a great chip. But it'll bring some premium features in, like, it's got a dedicated NPU for AI and that kind of stuff. And I think it'll be a good phone depending on how much it costs.
Yeah, I mean, usually that phone's always been in the $200 to $300 range. Again, obviously now that's being redefined primarily by Xiaomi and the BBK group, what a $300 phone can do, right? As we know from that Xiaomi Mi 9T and other phones from Vivo and Oppo have been really competitive in terms of pricing, aggressive in terms of pricing. So we'll see how it goes. Another thing related to that, I mentioned the Nubia Red Magic 3 earlier. I have an article coming up on Android Police. I think it might be published by the time you hear this podcast.
Oh, cool.
That is basically like life with the Red Magic 3 as a non-gaming phone. So I decided to use it. Because look, if you look at it, it's a $479 phone that's officially available in the US with a warranty that has a Snapdragon 855 and 8 gigs of RAM and a massive screen. And a Sony IMX586 in the back, a single camera in the back, but it's nonetheless a Sony IMX586. So my premise was, 5,000 milliamp hour battery, right? So my premise was like, what if you ignore the gaming stuff, never even play a game on it, never touch the shoulder buttons and worry about the fan controls, and because there's a built-in fan.
Yeah.
And for a second, use that as a normal phone, like you would a flagship, and how does it fare? And so that's what that article is about. And it's also kind of about the story of OnePlus kind of undercut everyone and has been for years, to the point where now you can get basically a Galaxy S10 Plus kind of device with the OnePlus 7 Pro for $300 less, right? List price.
Yeah.
Of course, you can buy the S10 Plus now at a discount, but it's still not going to be quite as low as the OnePlus 7 Pro. So my premise is, can we look at Nubia's gaming phone, even though it's a gaming phone, as kind of like doing to OnePlus what OnePlus is doing to everyone else, right? Undercutting by another $200.
Right.
And some people will point out to me, well, Miriam, why bother with this Nubia when you just buy OnePlus 7 non-Pro around the same price point? And my answer to that is 90 hertz. This Nubia phone has a 90 hertz display.
I haven't used the Nubia phone. Is it big? Is it chunky?
It's very big. It's basically the size of OnePlus 7 Pro, but has about a half-inch taller.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because of front-facing speakers. The display size is a wash, but because the Nubia has two front-facing speakers, to chin and forehead action, it's very small, but it's there. It makes the phone taller. In terms of width and thickness, it's about the same as the OnePlus 7 Pro. It's a big phone.
Yeah.
Big phone.
Big phone, but not over the top.
But not crazy. And so here's the thing. You get a super fast phone. Like you get 90 hertz refresh on the entire UI and all apps.
Yeah.
You get Snapdragon 855, 8 gigs of RAM, and you get battery life for days, even if you max out the performance. It's like, 5,000 milliamp hour will last you 2 days of super heavy CS kind you've used,
Yeah.
And then IMX486 camera, which although the camera app is not the best camera app, is still solid enough that it's very usable and very good. Doesn't have OIS, and the camera app is meh. But again, I installed a third-party camera app and added some of the functionality that was missing. There's a Google camera port from the Pixel available for it as well. That's a little buggy, but it does work. So I mean, the point is that's kind of the premise why I wrote the article. I was like, well, what if for a second you have less than $500 and you want a Snapdragon 855 and you want to have the fastest phone on the block and you want 90 hertz refresh,
right?
But you can't really afford a 7 Pro, and you don't want to downgrade to the 7 because it doesn't have 90 hertz. So what do you do? And I was like, well, maybe you should look at the Nubia, and it's been interesting, an experience.
It seems like a great device, even for non-gamers. I mean, given the specs that you just mentioned and the price that it comes at, for people who are really into their display technology and they want that super smooth experience and something that is going to perform well. I mean, you don't need to be a gamer to get a powerful phone, just the way that you don't need to be a gamer to get a decent computer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where I was going with that. And Yeah, so overall, you'll see in the story, it's an interesting experience. There's a few things, like, for example, the biggest thing that it's big. It's a really big phone, so for some people, it's really not going to fly.
Yeah.
It's ugly because it's a gaming phone. It's got like that butch, macho, but cheap-looking design. It's not cheaply made. It's all metal and glass. It's really well made, but it's cheap-looking and, feels like that kind of gaudy design. But the biggest issue is no NFC. And it's like, what?
I can't believe there are still companies making phones that don't have NFC. Even cheaper phones should have NFC.
I agree. I mean, Nokia was basically built on that premise back in the day. Remember that? Yep. Every single phone of theirs had NFC, and I think today they still do.
Yeah.
Now that they're a completely different company with Android. But the Snapdragon 855 equipped phone would have saved 20 cents on an NFC chip and coil.
Yeah.
At manufacturing time just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I can kind of get it on some of the, G series Moto or whatever. Somehow that's my biggest gripe with Moto's G series over the years.
Yeah.
Is that Moto, this is a phone destined for the US. It's kind of like the mid-market champion, right? Traditionally, the G series has been the phone we've looked at about, getting the best bang for our buck in the US with a warranty that works on any network. And they've always not had NFC, but only in the US. If you buy a G7 abroad, it has freaking NFC.
I know. I don't get it.
What?
It's ridiculous. I mean,
what?
It's a feature that is so helpful here as well. Like, it's helpful everywhere, but it blows my mind that even mid-range phones still don't have NFC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's the case with this Nubia. So if like me, use Android Pay everywhere, or Google Pay, everywhere.
Yeah.
You're going to be annoyed. But still, okay, look, $479. Are you going to say, well, why you went on about the Mi 9T? And I'm like, yeah, the Mi 9T is great.
Yeah.
But cheaper, but it doesn't have an 855, number one. Number two, it's super skinned to death.
Yeah.
This Nubia has stock Android.
Yeah.
Now, it might not get the updates as fast as a Pixel, probably won't, but it's, Android Pie unskinned at 90 hertz.
Yeah.
Like, it's so smooth and fast. You put it side by side with the OnePlus 7 Pro, and it's like, okay, like, here's a $200 difference.
Right.
And it feels the same.
Yeah.
Like, wow, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, let's play that game and see the game of not using a gaming phone for gaming.
And even, I mean, compared to the Mi 9T, it's got a much better display as well. Like, the performance is one thing, but if you really into your displays,
so you're right. I mean, the Mi 9T has a beautiful 1080p notchless, holeless display. Sure. It's OLED. But I have to say that the display on the Nubia, it's a bigger display, number one. It's 1080p as well, but it's a 90 hertz OLED, and it's it's bright enough in daylight. It's really good. Yeah. I'm surprised at that price point, honestly. I thought that was B1. I figured like they removed 2 cameras and put in Sony IMX586 in there, but I was like, that's a great way to save money. But the display, I was like, I don't know what they're going to do about that display, because 90 hertz is one thing on paper, but it's a whole different experience when you look at the thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So now we come on to some, to me, sad news, but to some people, great news. I would like to see what you have to say about this. Apple made some changes to the MacBook Air and MacBook Pro lineup this week. And, we're a mobile tech podcast, meaning we talk about mobile technologies. That includes laptops, tablets, and ultra-portable computers. I'm a big fan of using my Macs. I also am a big fan of using Windows machines. As you know, I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to that. I use Chromebooks as well. But my main computers have always been Macs. So I'm recording right now this podcast here in Portland on my MacBook. When I record in San Francisco, I've got more of a permanent setup, and I've got an iMac. But this is a 12-inch MacBook, the original, bought 4 years ago when it was announced. And it's been my battle axe, road warrior computer for 4 years at all trade shows, all trips. And it has never let me down. The battery still runs perfectly fine. This thing is an absolute champ. Now, it's a bit on the slow side, but I've learned to manage it in the sense that if I don't run too many tabs, in any browser, I'm good to go. And that's the trick. It's not a RAM limitation. It's more like the processor is like, especially mine is not the second and third gen of that. It's the first gen, and it hasn't really. It's a fanless processor, but it's a little underpowered, and you feel it. You don't feel it really rendering video. Actually, it's surprising. I do some video editing on it, and it's fine.
Wow.
1080p to be clear.
Sure.
But it's in of course, recording Audacity, all that stuff works great. But it's more like when you start having more than, I'd say, 10 tabs that things start falling apart. But you learn to manage that. And honestly, the reason I'm sad is because I believe that this is my favorite Mac laptop form factor of all time. I've had all the small Macs. I had the 12-inch PowerBook G4, and I had the original MacBook Air with a little flap on the side.
Yeah.
Like I've suffered. I've gone through the pain of early adopter, bleeding edge Apple, smallest computer they make technology. But this is the best they've ever made in that realm, and I don't think I think the sacrifices in performance have been well worth the portability, and that the fact that they've completely removed that laptop from the lineup, and then now the next computer up that you can buy is the Air, which is a much bigger and heavier and thicker, is a really, really disappointing to me.
I see where you're coming from. I feel like we saw this coming from a mile away. I mean, the MacBook hasn't really been updated that much in the past few years.
True.
And I feel like things got real hazy with whether you should buy a standard MacBook or an Air. And I have the Air. I have the 2018 Air. And I love it. It's not too chunky for me. It's not too big. In fact, it's really light compared to my previous 15-inch Pro. I think that I get it that some people might want something a little bit lighter, but at the same time, considering iPad OS, maybe for those who want something lighter and a bit, lower powered, maybe an iPad is the right way to go.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I think that it makes perfect sense from simplifying the lineup perspective.
Yeah,
but I didn't think they would drop it. I didn't think they would refresh it. I think they would let it linger like they did with the Mac Mini for a long time.
Yeah.
Until they made an ARM version.
Yeah.
That's what I thought would happen.
Yeah.
And I know they will make an ARM version. I think that this computer will reappear in a very similar ultra thin, ultra light, ultra portable form factor as a real Mac running Mac OS on ARM in a year or two. It will happen because there are a lot of people who don't want an iPad at that size. I'm one of them.
See, I don't think that'll happen. I think that they'll bring ARM to the Airline, but I feel like if they were going to do that, then they would have let it linger for another year.
Well, they might do a 12-inch Air that's, much less bezel and much smaller footprint.
Yeah.
I do think the branding was wrong. Like, I feel that why they ever called this the MacBook in the first place, I do not understand.
Sure.
Like, they had the Air brand, and then they made something thinner and lighter than the Air, and they didn't differentiate it by calling just MacBook. And now that's why the confusion came about for a lot of people. Do I buy a MacBook or do I buy an Air?
Yeah.
And I totally understand. Like, if you're coming from a Mac Pro of any kind, the MacBook Air is you're sacrificing very little for most applications. If you come from an older MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
And I think that it's perfectly viable. So I totally understand. I've played with one. I think it's a beautiful computer. I would totally buy one if I had to replace this. It's fine. Like, I'd live with it.
Yeah.
But there was this amazing experience of super lightweight, super thin portability. Like, this thing fits on an airplane tray, even in economy, and I can work.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Whereas, because it's like the top edge when the display's open kind of touches the back of the seat in front of me, but I'm still at an angle that I can use. I don't think I'll be able to use an Air in an airplane. I have to push the tray table as close as I can to the seat in front of me. And these are little things. And you're going to say, well, that's why you buy an iPad with maybe a bridge keyboard.
Yeah.
And it's heavier. It's actually bigger. It's thicker. And I don't want the iPad experience. I'm not a fan of iOS. I think that iPad OS, the new, looks very promising. But I want, be able to open a terminal, run scripts, have access to, compilers and do the fun stuff I like to do. And for me, I need a desktop-like experience. And so, of course, you can buy these refurbed right now for a few more months. Don't panic. But yeah, I'm a bit bummed because I feel like if they had an 11-inch Air, I'd be fine.
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay, we're like, not 11-inch, but like what I think they should do is stretch the current 13-inch Air to a 14-inch in the same chassis with less bezel.
Okay.
And then make a 12-inch version with a smaller chassis that is ARM-based and replaces the MacBook, and it's called the MacBook Air, 12-inch. Like basically, when they revamp the MacBook Air in 2 years, they'll be I'm pretty sure they'll be ARM-based, and one will be bigger, like a similar size to the current Air, and they'll make a smaller version for those of us who want the small version. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen.
Yeah, I could see that.
And then the pros are just like monsters. They've always been amazing machines for a lot of people. So
yeah,
I
could see that. I mean, if they do that, then they're basically bringing back the MacBook anyway, but with Air branding, and I could definitely see that happening.
Like, I'm not saying it coming back. Like I thought they would leave this in the SKU, kind of buried in there until this Air refresh with the new scissor keyboard they've been talking about, and then with the ARM-based, and then all of a sudden we'd have two sizes of Air, and the small Air would be basically what we have in a MacBook today, but way more efficient because of ARM. And on the Pro side, I want to add also they did some change to the Pro lineup. They finally got rid of. Actually, I'm also bummed by that. They got rid of the Pro Escape, the 13-inch without the touchpad, which. I hate the touchpad. I really don't like it. I don't want it. And I was really glad, even though they kind of didn't update it for a long time, that there was a 13 Pro that had no touchpad, even though it only had 2 USB-C ports, whereas the other ones had 4 USB-C ports. So now that laptop with 2 USB ports has a touch bar as well, and they've bumped the specs on it, and it's available at a lower price point, which is nice for everyone. But Apple, why are you persisting with the touch bar? We've all made it clear we don't want it.
This is another thing that I agree with you on. I do not love the touch bar either, but I think we also saw this coming a mile away. I was surprised that they kept it as long as they did, honestly. But I
mean, for me, it's like if Apple is serious about the touch bar, then why don't we have iMacs with touch bar keyboards?
True, and MacBook Airs.
And MacBook Airs, right? So to me, why did they get rid of the Escape? What needed to happen here in the Pro lineup was that this 13-inch entry-level Pro with 2 USB ports should have gotten a 10th generation or a 9th or 8th, whatever, like the latest that they could cram in their Intel chip, like the bigger brothers did, and kept it as an Escape, function key, normal keyboard. That's what or maybe go to the four USB ports. Here's even a better idea, Apple. And I know you're not going to listen to me, but why don't you make every Pro laptop you make, the MacBook Pros, all 3 of them, available with or without touch bar as a BTO, build to order?
Yeah. That'd be great. I mean,
I would even pay extra for you to remove that.
To me, it all comes down to just lineup differentiation. I mean, people are confused about which MacBook to buy, and now there's no question about which MacBook they should buy. But I agree. I mean, I'm not a touch bar fan. I like smaller, thinner laptops. It's frustrating for some of us, but I think we also saw it coming.
Yeah, I mean, look, the iPad Pro is definitely getting pretty awesome, but it's still not what I need. Yeah. And right now, I'm mourning. Yeah. So please mourn with me, all of you who are mourning, because some of you are probably rejoicing. It's okay. We can disagree. But anyway, it's the end of a chapter, and we have to move on. I mean, that's basically the reality. I know that I can buy a refurbished one if this one breaks or gets stolen for a little while, and I will. I promise you I would buy a refurbished one right now. I know it seems to make no sense when you look at the lineup, but I'll do it. Yeah. And then if I can't buy a refurbished one, I will buy a MacBook Air.
Yeah, just wait a few years.
I need 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage, so it's not going to be a cheap Air.
Yeah, that's a pricey Air.
Yeah, right now I looked at the refurbished 12-inch MacBooks, and I can get the specs that I have right now, which is I have 8 gig 512 because they didn't make a 16 gig on the first gen. Right. I'd buy the 16 gig 512, and I would it's about $1,600. Yeah. Refurb. So still a lot of money.
A lot of money for an entry-level laptop.
Consider this. I bought this MacBook, top of the line, the day it came out, out of store in person. I picked the best SKU they had, 8 gigs, 512 gigs, and it cost me $17.99.
Wow.
Yep, I went there. I did it. But 4 years I haven't upgraded my computer. 4 years of every trade show, every trip, every airplane, everything. That's insane.
Yeah, it sounds like a workhorse. I mean, with video editing in there as well, that's pretty intense.
Yep. And the battery's still ticking, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like I thought by now I would have had to replace the battery, but nope.
Yeah, or Apple would have made a program to replace it for you.
Yeah, that's what they like to do, isn't it? Speaking of companies who make very vertically integrated products that rock the world, we have another big piece of news this week because this is the Mobile Tech Podcast. And even though a lot of you know that my background is video games, I was a video game developer for 15 years. I made games professionally, and I did work on some gaming consoles that were mobile portable consoles, including the PlayStation Vita and the PlayStation Portable, the PSP.
Yep.
I didn't actually work on any Nintendo portable games, but there's big news in gaming land this week with the introduction of the Nintendo Switch Lite, which is a Nintendo Switch optimized for mobile use. Yay, Mobile Tech Podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, this is another one I'm kind of in two minds about. I have a Switch and I love it.
It's great,
love it so
isn't
much.
it?
I've played countless hours of games on my Switch, but one of the reasons I love it is that I can use it anywhere, including in my living room, and you can't do that on the Switch Lite, which, it's kind of a loss to me. I think they could have still made a dock for the Nintendo Switch Lite, but they have not.
I think I understand why they did it. It's very much like Apple, right? It's like this, let's be super focused about this product being a mobile product because we don't want to cannibalize the sales of the Switch for home use.
Totally.
And it's only $100 difference anyway, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So, and then, here's the first thing I'm calling on it right now. Somebody will take it apart, open it up, crack it open, and find like some traces on the motherboard where they can connect like a HDMI output.
Yeah.
And like do a hack where you can connect an HDMI cable to it.
Yeah.
I'm calling it now. This will not require any software changes or anything like that.
Yeah.
It'll happen though.
Yeah, but apart from that, I think it looks like a great device. I mean, I think it kind of...
I love the colors. I love the design. It's so iconic, so Nintendo. Their design language is so purely theirs. I love that about it.
The design is great. I think it might spell the end of the 3DS, though that it might be a few years before that happens. But
yeah, I think they said they were going to continue having them side by side. So I think they're just going to get rid of leftover stock at this point, at least,
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. But, if you have been wanting a Switch that's a little bit more portable, then, it's going to be a great option. And it runs all the Switch games that you love as long as they work in handheld mode, and most of them do. So,
Yeah, so the other thing, you can't detach the controllers.
No, but you can connect other controllers.
In fact, for games that require 4 controllers, you can buy a pair of the, whatever they're called.
The Joy-Cons?
The Joy-Cons and hook it up to the Switch Lite.
Yeah.
So the Switch Lite because it doesn't have removable controls, also doesn't have the infrared and rumble system in it.
That's true.
So some games won't work and will require, which is why they made it possible for you to buy the joypads, whatever they're called, and connect them wirelessly to the Lite so that you can play those games that require that functionality.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. It is interesting. And, you get a slightly smaller display. It's 5.5 inches compared to the 6.2 on the normal Switch. But yeah, like I said, all your favorite games are there. And I think it's really worth considering if you're into mobile gaming.
Totally. And then $199 is really not bad. I mean, it's a full-on, essentially like, home-grade console in your hand with the same battery life, the same hardware in terms of performance. They said that it runs exactly the same performance.
Yep.
And you're looking at, this going on sale for the holidays for probably $179 at special sales,
Yeah.
So, like, wow, this is exciting. I think this is really good news. Yeah, I'm stoked about it. I think the Switch has been a great success story, and I kind of like it even better as a dedicated portable device, to be honest with you, because this is a mobile podcast.
Right. I mean, it's $100 cheaper than the normal Switch, and you said it has the same performance, but that is true. But I think they might be looking to bump the specs of the standard Switch as well.
Yeah, for all we know, it's the same performance, software limited.
Yeah.
And it's already running a faster chip.
Yeah. There was a report, I guess yesterday or the day before, something about Nintendo requesting with the FCC to change the SoC or the processor in the original Switch. So I might get a little spec bump, but I don't really see Nintendo making a big deal about that.
No, I mean, remember, the audience is not a spec audience, right?
No.
And I think that's actually really good.
Yeah.
They really focus on the experience, which is really what should happen. So
yeah.
Good news all around, folks. Well, what else is there? Did we cover everything? Anything that you wanted to add?
Not off the top of my head. I think we covered all the major news of this week.
Yeah, not a bad week. Like when I invited you to the show, like we hadn't heard about Apple yet. We hadn't heard about Nintendo yet.
Nope.
And I was like, I'm going to have to go digging for some news in here. We're going to have like some rumors and there's going to be a rumor show.
Yeah.
And, sure, I can pat it a little bit by talking about my experience with, the Xiaomi and stuff. Have you had any device recently that you're kind of in love with that is kind of like the latest toy you have and you're excited about?
Smartphones? No. But I just got in the mail the V-Motor Crossfade 2 wireless headphones, and I absolutely love them. I'm in love with those headphones. They're perfect, almost perfect wireless headphones for like using around the house. They're over ear. They're pretty comfortable. They've been out for quite a while. I want to be clear. They're not new, but shout out to those
That's why
headphones.
I asked. I wanted to know what your toy was. This is your toy right now.
This is my toy right now.
This is this thing that when you put it on your head right now, like you get excited. You're like, this is awesome. I'm loving it.
Yep. They sound great. Good for the price. Really worth considering. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, cool. Listen, do you want to tell the audience where they can find you on the internet, the various publications, but also your social media handles and all that?
Sure. So I write for Digital Trends, as mentioned. I also do some stuff for Tech Radar. You can check out some reviews. I do some TV reviews, that kind of thing. And I do e-commerce stuff for Business Insider and Forbes. So that's like kind of guides on things you might want to buy. On Twitter, I'm at CDeLooper, CDELOOPER. And on Instagram, it's at Christian DeLooper.
And for all those ladies out there, Christian is taken as far as I know, but that amazing accent is Australian.
It's Australian. I'm told that I've lost it a little bit. I haven't lived in Australia since I was 14. I'm told whenever I go to Australia, I'm told that I have an American accent, and here I'm told that I have an Australian accent. So I don't know what to believe.
Well, it's definitely a muted Australian accent, but it's very charming.
I'll take it.
So, yeah. Everybody knows where to find me. I think I'm at Tankgirl on Twitter and Instagram. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character without the vowels. That's TNKGRL. If you need to spell my name, it's in the Twitter. Just look for it, Miriam Jouar. And I'm bringing that up because there's a YouTube channel that's a complement to the show. I mentioned earlier, GearBest and I have partnered for some really good deals. If you want to get a really good deal on a OnePlus 7 or a P30 Lite, go to my YouTube channel and check out my OnePlus and Huawei videos. And the channel is youtube.com/Miriam Jouar, which is why I'm mentioning my full name. If you need to spell that, go to my Twitter at Tankgirl, look for the name, spell it out without the space in the middle, youtube.com/Miriam Jouar. While you're there, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that little notification bell, like the videos. Tell your friends about it. Talk to me in the comments, of course. And then finally, of course, the podcast is at mobiletechpodcast.com. If you're joining this for the first time, you need to subscribe. There's an RSS feed at that URL. But also, all the major podcasting apps have me available. So Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, TuneIn Radio, and of course Spotify, which is I think what a large majority of people is using for podcasting these days. So check me out, look for Mobile Tech Podcast, and you should have no issues finding me. Finally, I want to thank our sponsor. Audible.com is our sponsor. They've been helping us out for a long time, and we love them because I'm a big fan of books and I like to read, but unfortunately I don't have a lot of time to sit down and read a physical book like a Kindle or a paper book. And so I like to listen to them on my road trips when I commute between, Portland and San Francisco in my Tesla, for example. It's great to have some audiobook action, and Audible delivers. I love that a lot of the authors will actually read their own books. If you're like a delivery driver or something and you're driving all day and you can't read, but you want to read because you're a bookworm, check out Audible. And if you aren't already an Audible subscriber, I have a special deal for you. In the show notes, in the description for this podcast, you will find a link to get a 30-day free trial where you can keep one book at the end, even if you decide to cancel. In the process of clicking through there and becoming a member, you will support the podcast. So check it out. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. If you don't have your computer in front of you and you want to get that URL, that's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. It'll be down in the description and the show notes. So click through, check it out for a month. If you don't like it, you can cancel and keep a book. But you support the podcast, so we appreciate it. And we appreciate Audible for being a long time, this is almost the beginning, sponsor of the show. And Christian, I want to thank you for being on the show this week. It was really lovely to have you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
You know what to do. Stay tuned till next week, folks. We'll have another show then. And until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.